This instructional video is to be used only as a training aid. It is not intended as a replacement for the Insta-Valve installation instructions or Hydra-Stop factory training. Installation operations should be performed by properly trained personnel. Before beginning any Hydra-Stop installation, be sure to read, understand, and follow the installation instructions in the manual. Never attempt to install Insta-Valve 250 insertion valves at pressures greater than 150 psi if equipment is not rated for 250 psi installation. This includes temporary gate valves and the Hydra Tapper machine. Contact Hydra-Stop at 708-389-5111 if you have any questions regarding equipment PSI ratings. Remember, always use appropriate safety equipment. Inspect the valve body to ensure no damage has occurred during shipment or storage. Locate the valve cartridge and the box containing the stainless steel mounting hardware. Store the mounting hardware in a clean, safe location. Locate and review the installation instructions. Place the valve in an upright position and remove the valve bonnet. Retract the cartridge set pins until they are flush with the inside diameter of the valve body. Thoroughly clean the pipe surface where the valve body will be installed and inspect for flaws, such as gouges, protrusions, or excessive corrosion. Irregular surfaces should be avoided to assure maximum gasket sealing. Lubricate the top and bottom of the pipe and mat and branch gaskets with a soap water solution. Ensure branch gasket is adequately lubricated. Mount the top half of the valve body on the pipe in the position required for permanent installation. Do not rotate the top half of the valve body after it is positioned on the pipe. Install the bottom half of the valve body using the stainless steel bolts, washers, and nuts. Finger tighten all mounting nuts until snug. Using a torque wrench, tighten bolts in the proper sequence as shown in this chart. Ensure gaps between top half and bottom half of the valve body are the same front to back and side to side within 1/8 of an inch. After bolts have been tightened to recommended torque, wait 10 minutes to allow the gasket to fully seat and retighten bolts to recommended torque. Recommended torque values: CI-DI pipe 65 foot-pounds, PVC pipe 55 foot-pounds, AC pipe 60 foot-pounds. Fill the valve body with water. Prepare and install the Hydra-Stop Quick Pressure Test Plug. Install the Quick Connect pressure test gauge and ball valves. Connect your pressure test source.
Perform a pressure test to ensure a complete seal between the valve body and pipe. Do not use a compressible medium such as air. Minimum test pressure 1.5 times the system working pressure. Maximum test pressure 375 psi. And 12-inch IV250s use the 12-inch temporary gate valve. Temporary gate valves are single-direction valves and must be positioned top up. The 12-inch temporary gate valve must be installed with the red bar facing up. If possible, avoid positioning the valve at the true 3, 6, 9, or 12 o'clock position to allow access to the completion plug pins. Bolt the temporary gate valve to the top of the IV250 flange using the bolts, nuts, and washers provided with the installation equipment. Ensure that a green fiber gasket is installed on the top of the temporary gate valve. Fully open the temporary gate valve. Place the Hydra Tapper on the P20 component. Bolt the Hydra Tapper to the P20 using the bolts and nuts included with the Hydra Tapper equipment. Select the proper size saw mandrel. Tapping of the 10 and 12-inch IV250 requires the 55-inch long saw mandrel.
Loosen and remove the Allen head pilot drill retaining set screw located on the side of the coring adapter. Visually locate the tapered relief on the base of the pilot drill. Notice the stopper ledge at the base of the taper. Mark the flat of the taper with a visible marking agent. Align the pilot drill flat with the Allen head set screw hole and insert the pilot drill through the center of the coring adapter. Confirm you've completely inserted the pilot drill and engaged the tapered flat. Look into the set screw hole for the marking on the pilot bit. Adjust the pilot drill until you can see the marking. Once aligned, insert and tighten the set screw. Test pull the pilot drill to ensure the set screw is properly locked in place against the pilot drill ledge. Screw the 4-inch cutter to the coring adapter and lock in place with cutter hardware. Thread the adapter cutter assembly onto the saw mandrel until tight, then back off until adapter through hole aligns with saw mandrel through hole. Insert the cotter pin and clip to lock the adapter in place. Attach the centering ring to the coring adapter using the 1/2 inch by 13 by 2 inch hardware. Lubricate the end of the saw mandrel to help it slide freely through the packing nut assembly. Slide the coring adapter and saw mandrel assembly into the Hydra Tapper until the centering ring bottoms out in the P20 component. Hand tighten the clamp lever on the packing nut assembly to keep the assembled shell cutter and saw mandrel in place. Lower the Hydra-Tapper assembly onto the 12-inch temporary gate valve. Use the nuts provided with your equipment and a cross-tightening pattern to secure the assembly to the temporary gate valve. Control the saw mandrel, loosen the clamp lever, and slowly lower the saw mandrel until the pilot drill is resting on the top of the pipe. Ensure the assembly can rotate freely in a clockwise direction with the pilot bit touching the top of the pipe. Slide a stop collar over the saw mandrel. Set the cutting depth by measuring from the top of the packing nut assembly to the lower side of the stop collar. Core sampling depths are shown in the following chart. 10-inch core sample depth is 4.5 inches. 12-inch core sample depth is 4.75 inches. Tighten the stop collar set screw. Confirm the measurement before proceeding. Install the drive motor and the lower restraint pin and cotter clip. Install the feed screw by threading it through the top plate of the Hydra-Tapper. Advance the feed screw with the OS and Y handle. Install the upper restraint pin and cotter clip. Ensure the ball valves on the Hydra-Tapper and the P20 are open. Connect the drive unit power source to the drive unit. Ensure the drive unit lever control is in the neutral position. Engage the drive unit and confirm the saw mandrel is rotating in a clockwise direction. Slowly turn the handle assembly in a clockwise direction, keeping slight, constant pressure. Close the ball valves on the P20 housing and the P2 housing of the Hydra-Tapper as water fills the housings and flows from the valves. The tap is complete when the stop collar contacts the packing nut assembly. Return the drive unit lever control to the neutral position. Tighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever to lock the saw mandrel in place. Remove the feed screw. Remove the drive motor. Place a box head wrench over the hex on the saw mandrel and use the wrench as a lever brake to hold in place. Loosen the packing nut assembly clamp lever and allow the pressure to slowly raise the cutter assembly fully into the P20 housing. Tighten the clamp lever. Close the temporary gate valve. Relieve the pressure from the tapping assembly by opening the ball valve on the Hydra-Tapper and the P20. Loosen the nuts and carefully remove the Hydra-Tapper assembly. Disassemble the core tapping equipment. Refer to Appendix E in the installation instructions to select the proper cutter for your installation, and then thread the saw mandrel to the cutter. Bolt the cutter to the saw mandrel using the standard cutter hardware. Insert the 4-inch centering tool into the pilot bit hole, align the through hole, and lock in place with cotter pin and clip. Lubricate the end of the saw mandrel to help it slide freely through the packing nut assembly. Insert the tapping assembly completely into the Hydra tapper and hand tighten the clamp lever. Lower the Hydra tapper assembly onto the 12-inch temporary gate valve. Use the nuts provided with your equipment and a cross-tightening pattern to secure the assembly to the temporary gate valve. Open the temporary gate valve. Hold and control the exposed saw mandrel, loosen the packing nut assembly clamp lever, and slowly lower the saw mandrel down until the cutter is resting on the center top of the pipe. Ensure the shell cutter spins freely in a clockwise direction. Slide a stop collar over the saw mandrel. Set the cutting depth by measuring from the top of the packing nut assembly to the bottom of the stop collar. Tapping depth is shown in this chart. For 10-inch pipe, set a tapping depth of 6 inches, and for 12-inch pipe, set a tapping depth of 7 inches. Tighten the set screw on the stop collar and double check your measurement. Install the drive motor and the lower restraint pin and cotter clip. Install the feed screw by threading it through the top plate of the Hydra tapper. Advance the feed screw with the OS and Y handle. Install the upper restraint pin and cotter clip. Connect the drive unit power source to the drive unit. Ensure the drive unit lever control is in the neutral position. Engage the drive unit and confirm the saw mandrel is rotating in a clockwise direction. Slowly turn the handle assembly in a clockwise direction, keeping slight, constant pressure. The tap is complete when the stop collar contacts the packing nut assembly. Return the drive unit lever control to the neutral position. Tighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever to lock the saw mandrel in place. Remove the feed screw. Remove the drive motor. Place a box head wrench over the hex on the saw mandrel and use the wrench as a lever brake to hold in place. Loosen the packing nut assembly clamp lever and allow the pressure to slowly raise the cutter assembly fully into the P20 housing. Tighten the clamp lever. Close the temporary gate valve. Relieve the pressure from the tapping assembly by opening the ball valve on the Hydra tapper and the P20. Loosen the nuts and carefully remove the Hydra tapper assembly. Remove the cutter and saw mandrel assembly. Remove the centering tool from the saw mandrel and then remove the coupon from the shell cutter. Place a green fiber gasket included with your equipment between the insertion housing and the tapping machine P20 assembly. Place the Hydra tapper assembly on top of the insertion housing with the pointed end of the P3 facing the same direction as the step stand of the housing. Install and cross-tighten the supplied bolts and nuts. Lay the assembly on its stand. The Insta-Valve 250 valve cartridge consists of a top section and a bottom section. The top section and bottom section must be firmly tightened together. Prior to removing operating nut, hold the base of the valve cartridge and with a pipe wrench, turn the valve stem firmly in the opening direction. Remove the operating nut and the white Teflon washer from the valve cartridge. Remove the auto equalization valve NPT plug. Set aside in a safe place. Hand tighten the auto E pin into the check valve. Push down the pin to ensure it is able to actuate. Place the insertion tool over the valve stem and tighten until snug. Tighten the knurled handle of the insertion tool until snug. Tighten the 3/4 inch insertion tool lock nut located at the base of the knurled handle. Ensure the raised face of the insertion tool is in contact with the valve cartridge and the auto E pin has been actuated.
Make sure the insertion tool is clean and free of rust or grime. Steel wool can be used to clean and smooth the surface. Lubricate the end of the insertion tool with a dab of the food-grade lubricant to help it slide freely through the packing nut assembly. Ensure the packing nut assembly clamp lever is loose. Insert the assembled valve cartridge and insertion tool through the insertion housing/tapping assembly until the top of the valve gate is approximately 2.5 inches from the bottom flange of the insertion housing. Make sure the shorter, truncated side of the valve cartridge, marked with a star, is facing upwards. Set up the Insta-Valve 250 10 through 12 inch alignment gauge for the size being installed. Refer to the alignment gauge instructions shipped with the 10 through 12 inch Insta-Valve 250 alignment gauge kits. Set the curved portion of the alignment gauge within the lock pin groove of the valve cartridge. Slide the valve cartridge and alignment gauge towards the insertion housing until the alignment gauge touches the insertion housing. Ensure the flat of the alignment gauge arm remains aligned with the truncated side of the valve cartridge. Place the 4¼ inch Insta-Valve 250 insertion depth gauge on the insertion tool. Place one end of the insertion gauge against the packing nut assembly. Slide the stop collar towards the insertion gauge until the stop collar makes contact with the insertion gauge.
Tighten the stop collar. Align the slots of the guide plate with the guide bars of the tapping machine and slide the guide plate over the insertion tool. When positioned, lock in place with the clamp lever.
Make a reference mark on the insertion housing at the 12 o'clock position, directly in line with the center line of the alignment gauge. Remove the Insta-Valve 250 alignment gauge. Lubricate the completion plug O-ring with food-grade lubricant provided with the equipment. Slide the valve cartridge assembly fully into the insertion housing.
Tighten the clamp lever on the packing nut assembly.
Safely lift the insertion equipment and place onto the temporary valve.
Align the insertion housing reference mark made in a previous step with the external rib cast into the valve body that is in line with the direction of the pipe. You may also use the set pin hole that aligns with the external rib as an additional alignment reference. Thread nuts and washers provided and tighten the insertion assembly in place.
Loosen the packing nut clamp lever. Lower the valve cartridge insertion tool assembly until it touches the temporary gate valve. Retighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever.
Install the feed screw by threading it through the top plate of the Hydra-Tapper until 2 to 3 inches are exposed under the top plate of the Hydra-Tapper. Slide in place a second guide plate over the end of the feed screw to keep the feed screw from spinning as you turn the Hydra-Tapper OS and Y handles. Continue advancing the feed screw until the feed screw bottoms out onto the locking nut washer.
Open the tapping housing and insertion housing ball valves.
Slowly begin to open the temporary gate valve until the insertion housing begins to fill. Stop opening the temporary gate valve.
Close the insertion housing ball valve once fluid reaches the ball valve. Wait for fluid to reach the tapping housing ball valve and close the ball valve. Allow the equipment stack to fully pressurize. Fully open the temporary gate valve.
Loosen the packing nut assembly clamp lever and begin advancing the valve cartridge insertion assembly. Continue advancing the feed screw until the valve cartridge assembly is completely seated. The valve cartridge assembly is completely seated when the bottom of the stop collar contacts the top of the packing nut assembly. Lock the valve cartridge assembly in place by tightening the 6 Allen head completion pins. Tighten the pin until snug. You may start with any of the pins as number 1, however be sure to follow a cross-tightening pattern. Do not start the next step until all completion pins have been properly set.
Tighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever and retract the feed screw 3 full turns.
Attach a drain hose to the 3/4 inch ball valve on the insertion housing, then run the opposite end to a discharge location outside of the excavation. Open the insertion housing ball valve and water will begin to flow from the drain hose. Slowly loosen the packing nut clamp lever to allow the insertion tool to rise to a stopping position. Raise the feed screw slightly, no more than 1 inch, to expose the insertion tool lock nut. Use a 3/4 inch open-ended wrench to loosen the lock nut until the outer shaft of the insertion tool can be raised to allow the auto equalization check valve to close. The light stream of water out of the 3/4 inch ball valve should begin to decrease and stop as the insertion tool is disengaged from the valve cartridge. Continue to turn the insertion tool lock nut, raising the feed screw 1 inch at a time as needed to fully disengage the insertion tool from the valve cartridge. Once the insertion tool is fully retracted, retighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever. Remove the IV250 insertion equipment and temporary gate valve. Confirm an O-ring is placed on top of the IV250 flange. Remove the Auto E pin assembly, replace the valve cartridge NPT plug. Place the white thrust washer over the valve stem.
Lubricate the O-ring in the bore of the IV250 bonnet and install over the valve stem. Align bolt holes.
Install the flange hardware and tighten the nuts.
Set the 2-inch operating nut on the valve stem. Thread the operating locking nut on the valve stem. Fully open and then close the Insta-Valve 250 to confirm a successful installation. The IV250 operates at 3 turns per inch, plus or minus 3 turns, depending on the type and condition of the inside diameter of the pipe.